We are live. About 30 seconds in here. I'll give it a quick second before I launch into the screed for today. We'll see if anyone joins. I do notice that people seem to catch the content afterwards anyway. So I'm happy to run with it, but I'll just wait for a second. I wonder if there's a good feature for the wait side. It does, I believe, show up in the recording. So it'd be better to cut while you're waiting for people to show up. All right, I'm going to do it. As the internet can tell from my shirt, it is Art Basel time. I'm here in Miami, where I often am. This is show number 3. I want to stay kind of on a production quota, if you will. I think, as with many endeavors in life, the first step is consistency. So, I'm trying to convince myself not to worry whether the content is good or not. Rather, if I just keep doing the activity, the content will eventually be good or be good enough. Feels like all CEOs are or will soon. Maybe not all CEOs. Maybe if you're in kind of like a startup setting, maybe like the Fortune 500 ones probably don't need to have too much of a direct to audience sort of presence. But if you're sort of an upstart, if you will, I think you probably do have to go direct to audience these days. I've noticed marketing in general has changed quite a lot in the last couple of years. And so here we are. We are all content creators. Solo show today. I think it was a good show with my co-founders last week. There were, it was a little bit annoying that we couldn't do it live, which is also fine. We may look into some other platforms that will allow us to do so, but we haven't done so yet. It's been a busy week between then and now. It is. It's going to be the holiday time of year. It's come up. It's been a long year, but it's also come up pretty quickly. I think I'll get into this later, but the pace of work and I guess just general activity has kind of picked up in the last few years. It wasn't like we weren't working all the time before. But yeah, so the acceleration of the year, it's a little bit disconcerting. I definitely want the feeling of time slowing down, which I'm not sure if I'll get again. They say you have to have a lot of novel experiences, and then your perception of time slows down, which is a good idea. I do that to some extent. But yeah, holidays are just about here. Had a good Friendsgiving. And that also, it's kind of becoming a tradition. Went to my buddy's place. It's been the same one a couple of years in a row, which I appreciate that he keeps doing that. One of the things I like to do during the holidays, which I may not get to do this year, is I try to force myself to wean off of caffeine so I can resensitize for the next year. It's not that there's a dead date, sometime in December. it just becomes sort of impossible to get most people engaged. People are with their families. So maybe this is, around the 20th, this happened. And, they want to eat food, buy, open gifts, drink alcohol, um, etc., and be with their families. I try to use this time to recharge a little bit for the next year, and the way I force myself to do it is, yeah, again, slowly ramping down the caffeine consumption till zero, and then I'm just sort of forced to like lay around. I can get some work done, but not much. I'm not even sure this year that this will happen. Like the pace of things is such that we may just keep keep running through December and then on into January and so on. And while this is not a bad thing necessarily, it means that something has changed. I don't know exactly what, but yeah, here we are. All right. That's my first real topic. Calling it there and back again with DeFi. So if you look back a couple of years, by the way, I don't necessarily have a great definition of DeFi. I mean, it's in the name, decentralized finance. But what does that actually mean? Are centralized stablecoins like USDC, USDT, DeFi? I guess not, although they are used within it. So, I think the lines around it are maybe a little bit blurry. But yeah, generally, let's say like DeFi is the concept of not just replacing currency with decentralized alternatives like Bitcoin, Ether, and so on, but more financial primitives, borrowing and lending, perhaps insurance if you use a broad definition of finance, trading services, etc., and also doing those in a fully decentralized manner. It's not obvious why you'd need such a thing at the outset, but there's been like why isn't Bitcoin just enough? There has been an explosion of activity, and I think DeFi has created some real on-chain financial markets in a way that was hard to achieve without some other mechanism. Tends to be complicated stuff, both requiring like a good understanding of blockchain primitives. And I'm not a finance guy by nature, but math background and all that, capable of understanding it. But I think people who have lived it for a while, even or maybe especially from the trad finance side, have sort of instincts for it that maybe I don't. But in any case, so kind of the point of the segment in the long part is, at first I was kind of quite DeFi skeptical, and I'm less so today. I'm not going to go into why I've moved on that. So let's go back to 2020 and maybe into 2021. Pandemic hit. I remember thinking the thought, we're definitely going to print a whole lot of money. And so things that are inflation sensitive, I should be aware of the effects of inflation that are coming. Also, it took a little bit of time for me in my adult life to understand interest rates. I don't know that I understand interest rates really well, but in essence, interest rates are kind of like the cost of money. And I remember, I think in 2019, I had some sort of traditional, trad savings account set up, and this was pre-pandemic, dropped interest rates from like 2% to in effect zero, or very low. And this was like a high yield savings account at the time. And I was like, why did it, so it's not earning really any money anymore. So I guess I should pull my money out of it and put the somewhere where it can earn some money. Um, and fairly immediately, the stock market went up in a big way. And this caused me to realize that okay, like I guess everyone else is doing the same thing. Um, and then I later became familiar with the concept of the risk-free rate of the return. Um, Arguably, um, U.S. Treasuries are the safest assets to be in, and that the U.S. government has never defaulted on them. And basically, the rate at which Treasuries pay, you're going to get that money back from the U.S. government. Um, for fiat currencies, I suppose it's not impossible to default on them, but the sovereign has to sort of choose to default on them, which might happen. You might be in a case where you're experiencing some sort of financial crisis, and the government thinks it would actually be better to default than to pay back its debts, even denominated in its own currency, which you can always print more of. But that doesn't happen um, all that often. So I was like, okay, what's going to happen? Like, people are going to be working from home. Should buy some Zoom. We already were using Zoom at the time. I did do that. It was good. I didn't buy enough of it. Sadly, it was not quite de minimis, but it was a good bet for a moment there. It went up quite a bit. Ether was at like $80. I was like, okay, that's a good, re-entry price after the first or entry price after the run up into through I guess 2017 into 2018 and so on. I think it had peaked at 1200 for the first time and had gone all the way down to 80. Debt would be bad because I knew we were gonna print a lot of money, so you'd be getting paid back with dollars that are worth less. Also, there's some effect of the interest rates on sometimes things that are debt related. Obviously, treasuries weren't paying anything, but sometimes things that were debt related would uh, also perform worse in a low interest rate environment. Pretty quickly, you saw asset inflation. People, happen interesting in different ways. So, create a lot of new dollars. Stock market kind of, immediately went up. People were moving out of locked down major cities to suburbs or even rural environments, sometimes ephemerally, sometimes permanently. Um, so housing prices, like in upstate New York, you saw enormous increases in housing prices, and I think some of those towns were like some of the biggest year over year in terms of the increase in housing prices, because I guess people wanted some space. They say, and I was in New York for most of this time. People say, if in Manhattan, you might have a really small apartment, but really your apartment's your bedroom and the city is your living room. If the city's closed, you're kind of just stuck in this shitty bedroom. And so, yeah, so there was this tremendous flight. Big, call them the laptop classes did sort of okay during COVID. Probably these are people who, most, maybe more than half Americans own stocks. But in particular, these people probably saw their stock portfolios go up and were able to continue to work as I was. And lots of people who had, face-to-face required jobs, especially in the trades, et cetera, couldn't. It's kind of nuts, the whole thing. Pretty quickly, the VC bubble started to inflate. Again, if there's a lot of new money out there, and moreover, you can't earn any money risk-free because interest rates are zero, that money is going to try to find a home. And so VCs were raising mega funds. This was also one of the times where you started to really see a strong correlation between the crypto markets and the stock markets. Bitcoin, ETH, et cetera, pretty much started to act like high-flying tech stocks during this period of time, where at least subjectively I perceived that they were more decoupled in the past. It was sort of the same people buying both, I guess. If you were a believer in tech generally, maybe you were a believer in crypto specifically at that moment alongside um, your tech investments. So you got a lot of people sitting at home, um, watching what's going on in the world, waiting out the pandemic, um, looking at the stock market, and I think to some extent the same impulse helped to inflate the crypto bubble at that time. Again, a lot of new dollars chasing riskier assets than treasuries, um, and sort of in the crypto ICO boom of what was it 2017 2018, that has sort of set the stage for lots of products to be created that were kind of ready for prime time around this time. So people got funds one way or another, and these products had been available, but you saw this huge spike in usage and things like Binance. The NFT craze really hit. It had existed for probably a couple years at that point. Um, and there was no yield coming from the government. So I think dollars started to chase yield in general. DeFi offered a lot of yield. I remember, and also TradFi in the crypto space. Like there were some of these, like a BlockFi, or a Celsius. Basically, it was theoretically they were spread lenders. They borrow money on one side, they lend it out at a higher rate on the other side. The people who supply the borrowed money earn a yield in that process. Everybody's happy theoretically, as long as the thing doesn't blow up, which of course it did. But just the incredible speed of the price increases and the amount of activity that was going on, et cetera, the attention that everyone was paying to really all of the stuff. It kind of included the stock markets too. The years are running together on me, but the meme stock thing happened, which was very funny with GameStop, et cetera. Sort of it was like an era. There's plenty of people who kind of became 18-hour a day crypto traders. I know at least a handful of them, probably an element of addiction in that. But so much money came in so quickly that the systems were tested really rapidly, and plenty of them not exactly ready for prime time. So things blew up in a spectacular way. Celsius, FTX, Terra Luna, stablecoin DPEG, a lot of value lost there. A whole bunch of, a lot of institutions with digital in the name, Anchorage. It was a big blow up. Lots of funds were lost or stolen. By FTX time, I was sort of embarrassed for a little while at being in the space. I remember running into someone who I think it's like a hotel manager who, I'd been at some events at that hotel that were crypto related. And this is like a couple years later, expressed the opinion that the major players in the space were frauds. And so the industry as a whole was kind of discredited, doesn't get a lot of interest in these events anymore, et cetera, et cetera. And there was truth to that, obviously. I think that Celsius, I think we saw Alex Mashinsky plead guilty today or yesterday. It's a lot of news quickly. But you kind of have to watch for the dust to settle sometimes. And I think at root what happened is a lot of money came in, assets followed, nominally the highest yield that was available, And a lot of that time, high yield sort of intrinsically means high risk. It's almost a law of nature. People ignored that. Um, it actually seemed to be quite a bit worse with centralized players. I think you could call Terra Luna a big DeFi blow up. But folks like the Uniswaps, the Aves, et cetera, seem kind of robust, still around. I know, Uniswap has like a big bug bounty right now, like $15 million or something crazy like that. And I think we've generally seen this over the years. Like exchanges get hacked, big depositories of assets get hacked, wallets get hacked, et cetera. But like mostly the protocols, the infrastructure, et cetera, is pretty robust and just kind of sticks around. And I think that is kind of what we're seeing today. It's a new cycle, new things going on. But I think DeFi probably in the long run may really be better in a sense than TradFi. It's going to take, these systems need a good beating, so to speak, and they're getting it. And I think the forgetting about the fact that a lot of the ill that happens in the crypto world is from custodians, is a mistake. So DeFi has also started to answer the question, like, how do you live in the real world, primarily through crypto? So have like centralized stable coins, for instance. USDC, USDT is like de facto legal tender, at least in some countries. The decentralized alternatives thereof are, getting popular and may offer real substantial benefits. At least some of the DeFi folks are comfortable using the protocol to manufacture yield on those dollar equivalents, whereas the centralized players typically do not. And so kind of we'll see, right? I think most of the, other than poor smart contract coding and or intentionally poor smart contract coding, the big problems that you see with DeFi have been due to sort of circularity, or like in a kind of circularity and low quality collateral sort of maybe being the same thing, or at least related. What I mean by that, so Terra Luna, I forget which one was which, but you had a floating asset and a supposedly stable asset that was an algorithmic stablecoin. And the stable asset was backed by the floating value asset, which can be okay, right? There are many cases in which people get home equity lines of credit. The value of the house floats. Securities margin loans. You own some stocks. You want to make a purchase of some kind. You don't want to sell the stocks. You borrow against it. I forget if I've discussed it on the radio show, but Adam Neumann being a super famous example, having eventually borrowed something like $400 million from Chase against his WeWork stock, and obviously he got the better side of that trade. Although I believe Chase was made whole in part by SoftBank. So Adam Neumann always getting the right side of every trade. Maybe completely by SoftBank. I think it was like part of the settlement for him to leave. Impressive, leaves everyone else holding the bag. Unethical, but you're just sort of like, wow, how did this guy must be some sort of evil genius. So this all said, so I think I'm starting to believe that, like, one, DeFi is here to stay. It might be better in the long run for the consumer. And it just has to be sort of designed sensibly enough that, like, in a complete sort of do your own research world, it's probably not going to make it to mass adoption. Like, I think at least at the application layer, there've got to be simple primitives that nudge people in the right direction. Um, and again, avoiding the circularity, like quite famously, recently Vitalik and many other people in the crypto space are now asking like where the yield comes from. Um, and part of the reason we're so interested in RWAs is that there's an answer. There's often an answer for productive assets. But that it's not clear to me that any of the underlying mechanisms are wrong, and then some of them are really ingenious. Automated market makers, pretty cool. Pools of liquidity, all that sort of thing. It's sort of remarkable that DeFi can work. Actually, it's almost in the same way that you wouldn't really think something like Bitcoin is possible. It feels halfway similar with DeFi, maybe not as big a leap, but it's real serious ingenuity. And so, yeah, I think I was wrong, and to some extent, things move really fast. The news cycle is often very negative on everything crypto, and you have to sort of wait for the dust to settle to see like what's robust and what was sort of a flash in the pan. Like I think we'll even see robust features coming out of things like meme coins, though it seems super crazy at the moment. And so, yeah, DeFi probably good long run. I think it'll figure itself out. There will always be problems. The bad things happening, I think, will trend down over time. They will be also correlated with massive injections of capital due to price action and all that sort of thing. So one hopes that actually the prices don't go up too fast, because then you get bad actors, irrational exuberance, and all that sort of thing. But that I think I'm a long run believer in it, and it's probably not all that far off from functional. Obviously it works today. It's really sort of UX and maybe the right sort of gentle recommendations that keep it from more mainstream adoption. Anyways, DeFi, I like it. Okay, so it is the Art Basel time of year. We did an Art Basel event, Block Apps did last year, which was fun. We're not doing one this year. My first time at Art Basel, I'm going to say it was 2018, I believe. There was actually a little bit of art in blockchain activity at that time, but primarily, and still, an art event. Though I think in some years it has had a really heavy blockchain component, and that sort of waxes and wanes, I think, with the NFT market and so on. I think I'm not even sure, so there have been one end of 2020, maybe not end of 2021, probably. I went again end of 2022. So good gap in between. In some ways, the art, I remember end of 2022, Art Basel kind of marking the end of what I felt was the, COVID Rumspringa era, where at least for a few months in 2020, I know that we had a really hard time. At that time, we had nearly entirely sort of corporate clients who themselves were figuring out, like, how do we work from home? Some of these had industrial operations at scale, and so those people were allowed to be on site in the lab and the what have you. But the people we were working with primarily were like, at desk jobs in strategy functions or finance functions or tech functions or innovation functions. And so, it took a while for them to just even figure out how to function from a corporate day-to-day perspective, where they were very used to coming in the office every day, and then it all stopped. So there was like a couple month adjustment period there, and then it was like, so what do you do? We had lockdowns. Then the lockdowns ended, and it was still in this strange intermediate zone, um, where there it was hard to move the ball forward on like contracts that we were delivering on, just because everyone was distracted, supporting users, tech teams, et cetera. And so again, this period also had funny rule suspensions, where you were allowed to drink outside in New York, because we knew the spread was worse indoors. Outdoors was thought to be better. Get some exercise, and go ahead and pick up a cocktail. And the city also, like, I found it was a funny announcement around that time. I guess they knew there'd be a revenue shortfall. They're like, yeah, we're going to legalize recreational marijuana and online gambling. Sort of the best was like, stay at home, smoke weed, gamble. Don't go to the office. But it took, I think, the business. There was sort of a lot of business travel stopped for a long time, just because people were, took a while for the vaccines to come out. People were just also not comfortable with it. Norms really changed quite a bit, and I think, in my mind, Art Basel 2022 sort of marked the end of that bouncing around era, in which shortly after things felt quite business as usual and accelerating. And, it does feel like each passing year I somehow find more hours or more of a percentage of my time to spend working. But there was a sort of lull in 2020 to 2021 that we likely all experienced. And then it's really gone the other way now, and the pace of things seems faster than ever since then. Made some new friends, some old friends, visiting, etc. in the 2022 Art Basel. I'm a little bit into art. I have some cool decorations and such. I've done a tiny amount of art collecting, mostly emerging artists. Not anything. I guess you would call it fine art, but not like no one famous at all. And so had some, but a lot of people I knew were in town. Saw a whole lot of people during that week. Made some local friends, and yeah, it's also sort of the kickoff of the like Miami season, if you will. Subsequently, in 2023, things had ramped up some. We did a Block Apps event, which was fun, and it sort of allowed me to see, okay, what happened in between. Like, a lot of those same people come back. Some of them, I know some people who live in Europe who I guess I've only really seen at Art Basel, and maybe some other time. But it's enough of a tradition that it allows and sort of forces you to assess like what happened in between. And it's kind of the same thing again this year. And so to say, maybe in 2022, I'd also fairly recently moved down to Miami. I was kind of looking to meet new people. At the moment, I mostly want to see people I already know but don't see often. This is the reason I go to essentially all conferences, and maybe through these people start to meet some new people. Some people are very like good and natural networkers. Can do it. Not exactly my thing. but I do actually find the ritual part of it sort of useful. Uh, there are the Art Basel people. I would say there's obviously working artists, but there's a big intersection between the Basel scene and the general scene of people who, I don't know, spend a bunch of time in like high end nightlife. They'll go to there's lots of these global events for the youngish but not that young people. Formula One, you see them in the Hamptons in summer or Saint Tropez or something, and they're either cool people or wealthy people or both. Um, the so you get a lot of tech people, a lot of finance people. The tech people are a little, these groups of people are actually quite similar in a lot of ways, but have small differences that probably um, make them feel that they're more different. Like very competent people who are sort of trying to take, maybe said uncharitably, the smoothest risk-adjusted path to some amount of wealth, social status, and they tend to like a sort of well-trod roadmap. I think the difference with startup-y people is, startups may never work out, and they're probably going to be harder than these paths, and you might hit it way bigger, but most likely you won't. And so it's a different sort of personality that's attracted to working at a startup than kind of any big prestigious institution. And I sort of see like this scene as kind of reflective of, to some extent, that same set of, I don't know, elite but conformist values that, so I'll go to these parties a little bit. I'll check it out a little bit. Maybe part of the difference also, I have like a hard time if I don't have to get on a plane, I'm really happy. And I think some people like actually really look forward to being in the scene. It's a duty if it's not convenient for me that sometimes like I like I've liked starting to really go to the big crypto events again, and crypto's not really part of the scene, though it's perhaps adjacent to it. Um, but Art Basel is a funny case in point. Art is high status in a way. It A lot of it is wealthy people trading money for cool. There's certainly let's say a tax avoidance or other aspect to it, tax burden minimization. It's also a funny thing. I was speaking with a friend of mine yesterday he's European, lives in Paris, may leave at some point. The US doesn't seem to have a leisure class quite like Europe does. What I mean by this is like people who both, let's say, have enough family money to be retired and are actually retired sort of young. The people that I know like that in the US are like managing a family office in quotes, but they're actually really managing the family office. Like they're actively deal sourcing, they're throwing parties that, yeah, they're parties to, be decadent, but they're like really looking for investments to try to like generally grow the pie. And like the family like splits it between the kids, and they're all like portfolio managers, somehow, or some of them running their own companies or all that sort of thing. And I guess like my friend used the word, yeah, Europe has a sort of like old money aristocracy where the goal is like not to work. And I think Americans don't quite have this concept. It may exist, but yeah, I was like, I went to undergrad with plenty of people who wouldn't have to, but they all just like went and worked for Goldman Sachs or something, and then probably are off into their own thing at the moment, which is interesting. Again, I think it's like a social expectations thing. You don't. There could be a sense of guilt. People also just need to be busy with something. Um, you probably see this a lot in the nonprofit sector, or certain segments of it. But it's definitely funny. Definitely our world differences on this front. But in any case, you may meet some Euro people who are, more or less retired, who show up at Art Basel, and I suspect the American equivalent people could be, but just often aren't, um, which is kind of funny. Anyways, I want to close on the craziness of the continued news cycle. I've asked myself a question a bunch. Is it that the world is getting more crazy, or that I and everyone else, or many other people, are paying more attention? Um, as a for instance, today, the CEO of United Health was murdered, and at 7 a.m. in like Midtown in Manhattan, like an hour before an investor meeting. It's like a 500-600 billion dollar market cap company. It's crazy. South Korea had a couple hours or more of martial law, first time in, I don't know, 40-ish years. There's some sort of no confidence vote in the government in France today. I'm not trying to comment too much on the details of these stories. One, because they're emerging, but just the point, like, to me, big news is something that someone will text me, or maybe multiple people will text me. I've gone through waves of like trying to completely ignore the news. Now I'm like watching it again, which I would prefer not to, but sometimes can't look away. And even like, what was it, a month or 2 or 3 ago, like Bangladesh, the leadership had to flee the country. That was like a 1-day news cycle. And it's just like not been mentioned again at all. It's still going on. It's been all manner of Ukraine news lately, that also have been typically 1-day news cycles. So I would guess that two things are happening. We're just more aware of what's going on, and so news hits faster. But also, the world is changing faster, and the I think they're both kind of technology related. Like people are just much more able to communicate and coordinate, and so kind of massive action, if you will, can be taken pretty quickly. And that part does feel sincerely new to me. We've got great and powerful technology tools, and it just makes the world different. Mostly on balance, they've been quite good, but yeah, I think the ability for big things to happen quickly has changed. As compared with when people had to, call each other on the phone, send telegrams, and all that sort of thing. So I kind of, I spoke to, I remember back in 2020, I like to ask people questions about the future of, sometimes the world seems like it's getting more normal. And then, there was this, I kind of lived through this, but there's like the 90s had the concept of the end of history or something. That things were just going to be hunky dory, and sometimes it feels like things are getting crazier. We're definitely in a crazier cycle, and if you had asked me in 2020 how long things were going to get crazier, I think I said to a bunch of people at least 5 years, or almost 5 years out. And it feels like another probably 5 plus. So crazy is not bad necessarily. Like crazy can be interesting. Loss will happen. Crazy might be good for crypto. I don't want the world to be crazy, but sometimes there are benefits to such things. But yeah, I think so. If you ask me today, I don't think this is going to stop. I also think, again, we're paying more attention than we used to be. Like if people report in let's say, right, 2024, that the world is dangerous much more than they did in, let's say, 1994 or 92 or 91, I think was like the peak violence here in the US. And that's from media coverage too. But something's going on, I can feel it. So we'll all stay tuned. With that, I will head off to the festivities. Let's say hello to the scenesters, etc. Good evening.